Hello, this is Brian from Invoice Away, and in today's video I'll be taking you through how to use Xero's repeating invoices and Invoice Away's workflows. Now the best way to illustrate this is with an example, so I'm just going to pop over to this Word document. So let's imagine we're a fictitious company called Company ABC, and we provide co-working space services. We have a number of tenants and we charge them rent at $1,000 per month. We are very strict and we require rent to be paid promptly on the first of each month. The best way we've done this is to use a direct debit facility, popular one being Go Cardless. So there's, I guess, the base setup. Now, at the moment, the way we would normally create these invoices in Xero is, I'll just jump over here into Xero. Now, this is what the typical invoice setup would be, which is we're repeating an invoice every month. We're setting up for the first of that month. In this case, being our current month is September, I want to set it up for next month, which is the 1st of October 2021. I want payment to be made on the same day, or well, I want it to be paid on the first of the month, which is why I've set it up as 0 days after the invoice date. This is a fictitious customer, and my rent, which would be October 2021, $1,000, and so on and so forth. Now, we would take approve as sending. So in this setup, what would happen is on the first of each month, Xero will automatically send the invoice to the customer to make payment. Now, assuming there wasn't any direct debit facility, what this means, especially if your clients are doing bank transfers, is one being they've just received the invoice on the first, and we're basically saying you need to pay up by the end of the day. Now, this might not go down well with a lot of your customers, especially if they have to make payment, in less than 24 hours. And they'd be asking why you didn't give them the invoice earlier. And the reason being is Xero doesn't yet support sending invoices at an earlier date, but having a different invoice date to when you want to send it at. The other thing is, if you do use a direct debit facility like Go Cardless and you've integrated with Xero, you would know that that facility works off the due dates of your invoices in Xero. Now, how I believe Go Cardless facilitates direct debits is it requires a minimum of 3 working days or whenever the invoice due date in Xero is, whichever is later. Now, because the invoice was created on the 1st of October 2021, which is when it will register in Go Cardless system that a direct debit is required, and the due date was the 1st of October, it will do a comparison of which is later. Is the due date of 1st of October 2021 later, or is a minimum of 3 to 4 working days later? And in this case, 3 to 4 working days is later. So even though our due date is the 1st of October 2021, Go Cardless will not commence that direct debit till 3 to 4 working days later. And I assume this would be the same principle for many direct debit providers. Obviously, you don't want to get your cash flow at a later date. You want to get it as soon as viably possible. So that's the other issue with setting up an invoice in this method. Now, the workaround for that is to create your invoices earlier. So in this case, I'm saying I want my invoices to repeat every month. I want it to be created a little earlier. So I'm going to say the 28th of the month. I'm going to say it's due on the 1st of the following month, which would be October 1st. And I'll tweak this so it's month plus 1. So when the invoice gets created in September, it reflects correctly saying rent is October 2021. And everything else is pretty much the same. Difference being I'm approving it. Now the reason for that is you don't want to send an invoice. You might choose approve for sending, approve, it doesn't really matter. The only real issue here is your revenue will be sitting in your September accounts when you most likely will be wanting it to sit in your October accounts, because your revenue does relate to the month of October, not the month of September. So while this in principle works on a few levels, one being the invoice gets sent earlier to the customer, and two, you're giving enough time for GoCardless to facilitate a direct debit, or if they're doing a bank transfer, at least a number of days for the customer to make payment promptly. The issue here is you would manually have to, once this invoice is created, you would manually go in and change the invoice date to the 1st of October so that it sits in your October profit and loss or income statement. Now that's not too much of an issue if you're dealing with a handful of invoices per month, but if you're, numbering clients in the 20s or 30s or even hundreds, this can be a very time-consuming process. And that's where Invoice Away comes in. So Invoice Away similarly works with GoCardless, where we do require the invoice to be created in Xero before we can do any actions with it. So what we're going to do in this example is we're going to want to create an invoice still earlier in the month. We're going to leave it as this. We're going to say we want our due date to be the 1st of the following month. And all of this is fine. And I'm going to save it. I'll just do support. Actually, no. I don't want to approve this for sending. I just want to approve it because Invoice Away will handle the sending. So I'm just going to click save. So what that means now is on the 28th of every month, an invoice is going to be created in Xero. Now, this is where we'll jump into Invoice Away to solve the other piece of the problem. So we're going to create a workflow. We're going to search for invoices that have not been marked as sent, which would be the case because you're only approving the invoice, you're not sending it. And we're going to say our invoices stage is equal to unpaid. And we're going to say the invoice date is equal to 28 of the current month. Now, if I were to do a preview, I can see that invoice has been picked up. I did create an example invoice to illustrate what, actually, no, this should be 28. Oh, 28. So this is when the repeating invoice is created, the invoice in Xero. This is how it would look. And this is how it would be previewed if your repeating invoice had already been created in Xero. So I'm happy with that. And I'm happy with my conditions here. And I'm going to click next. So this is where you set up your invoices to be sent, on what date you want your invoices to be sent. So I'm going to say I want it to be sent monthly. Now, you obviously want to create these invoices, or you only want to send these invoices after they've been created in Xero. So in this case, because we have chosen our repeating invoices to be created on the 28th of each month, we need to set up our frequency or our workflow to run after the 28th of September. I believe Xero will create its invoices at midnight on the 28th, so having this invoices sent on the 28th, maybe at 9 a.m. will be enough time for it to pick up all the repeating invoices that were created. So just go ahead and choose your email template. I want to send a PDF attachment, and I'm fine. I do not require a copy to be sent to me. So click next. Now this is where we solve that workaround that you would have been doing in Xero, which is to change your invoice date. So Are there any actions you'd like to take prior to your invoices being sent? Yes, we said we want to change the invoice date, and this is where I'll ask you to what date you wish to change it to. Now, based on a survey I did, these were the most popular options that people picked. So these are the options that I made available. So in this case, we want it to be the first of the following month. So what we're going to do is when the invoice is created, we're going to pick up the invoice, and then we're going to change the invoice date to be the first of the following month. So what's going to happen is this invoice here is going to automatically be changed by Invoice Away to be the 1st of October 2021. That change will happen, and then only will we send those invoices out to your customers. So I'm going to give this workflow name, and you can just preview the conditions you've set up. So I've just said my invoice status is not sent, invoice stage is equal to unpaid, and my condition is the 20th day of the current month. And we want to change the invoice date to be the first day of the following month. Now, the only thing to note here is pre-schedule actions work on invoices that are not paid, because as you may know, when an invoice has partial payment or is fully paid, Xero restricts certain fields from being edited. And one of those fields that can't be edited is the invoice date. So unfortunately, we're not able to change invoice dates on paid invoices, but we are able to change it on unpaid invoices, which should be the majority of our users. So I'm going to confirm that. So there you have it. So essentially, you're solving this process of, sending your invoices earlier to your customers, but also reflecting the right revenue periods for your invoices that you create. And Invoice Away will solve those issues. And yeah, feel free to go ahead, and if you have any feedback or questions, feel free to send it to me using the option here. You can send your feedback here, or if you want to send an email, just email your feedback to support@invoiceaway.io. And there you go. Happy invoicing.